make sure that you put in the upper column the date, which is 10/7, and this is called the scientific approach. Okay, so that's the title of our second cycle. A lot of this stuff is probably going to be a review for you. In elementary school, you should have talked about something that is called the scientific method. This is a vocab word. And the scientific method is an organized plan for gathering, organizing, and communicating information. So it's a plan, an organized for gathering, planning, and communicating information. Okay, so the scientific method is an organized plan for gathering, organizing, and communicating information. Now, there are 5 steps to the scientific method, and the goal of the scientific method is basically to be able to better understand or answer a question. So I'll let you get caught up there, but our whole point of the scientific method is that we're faced with a question and it's our job to come up with an answer for it or to better understand it. And so we use the scientific method for that. Justin, I got a thought experiment for you. Okay? Here it is. Am I going to get more wet from rain by walking in the rain, or am I going to get more wet by running in the rain from point A to point B? So if I have to get from the middle school over to the high school, am I going to get more wet by walking over there or running over there? What do you think?
I think running.
Okay, how come?
Because first of all it's raining and you get the ground wet, and if you run, like that water splashing up on you, and that would cause like times of water splashing on you.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
I think you'll get more wet walking, because then you're going slower and the rain falls on you more. And when you're running, the rain kind of drips off of you.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I would think walking would get you more wet because you're just walking really slow, so all the rain's going on top of you, and then on your head, and then it all drips down into your clothes and stuff. If you're running, you could get there faster, and then you could get less wet.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that you would get the same amount of wetness on both walking and running. I saw a video on it online. And when you're running, the water would sort of slant towards you and above you, so it's not the same as walking or being heavier incidents.
Okay. Good thought. Yeah.
I'd say you get wet running because then you're exposing more of your body when you stride.
Okay. Okay. So what we do right now is we have developed the first step of a scientific method. Okay? Step number 1 of the scientific method is to ask a question, or you have a problem. Okay, so the first step of the scientific method is you are faced with some type of question or you have a problem that you're faced with. And what it is you are going to try to solve is kind of the definition of that. So what are we going to try and solve? Okay, so what is it that we're actually trying to solve? Well, in this case, we're trying to figure out, are you going to become more wet by running in the rain over from the middle school to the high school? Or is it going to be that you're going to get more wet by walking from the middle school to the high school? Okay? Now, after we developed this question, I just asked you some of your thoughts. Okay? And a lot of you had different ideas. Some of you said that but just by walking, some said that it would be the same. Some of you might think that it might be by running. Okay? Anybody know what that process is called? You know what? It begins with an H. Big fancy word. Yeah. Very good. Very good. So the second step of the scientific method is to develop a hypothesis. Okay, so we're going to develop a hypothesis. Another way of phrasing hypothesis is prediction. Okay, so a hypothesis can also be phrased as a prediction. And there's two things that have to be a part of a hypothesis. The first one is the fact that it has to be a proposal, or it's a proposed answer to the question or problem. Okay, so it's your thought kind of, or your proposed answer as to what you think is going to come out from the question or the problem. So what do you think is going to be the answer? The other thing that a hypothesis has to be is testable. What does it mean to be testable? Yeah.
That you can test it.
Yeah, that you can test it, that you can run an experiment on it. All right? So we know that we have a question. We know that we have a hypothesis. Some of us thought that running, some of us thought walking, some of us thought that it would be the same. So now what's the next thing that we would have to do if we were going to use the scientific method to try to solve this? Yeah, let's go here. Yep. Melody, you can go.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you would have to actually test it and see what it does.
Yeah. Okay, so our third step of the scientific method is going to be that you are going to experiment. Okay, experiment or experimentation. And this is kind of the fun part of it all, right? This is where you get to carry out the experiment. Or do the lab. Okay. So how the heck could we develop a lab to test if you are going to get more wet walking or running, or would it be the same from the middle school to the high school? Yeah, what could we do?
Couldn't you like take a bucket with like some markings on the side and then like run through the rain and then see how much you get, and then you could walk?
Okay, so like you could have some type of rain gauge type deal where you're walking across the parking lot, and then you could run with it too and measure it off. All right, that's an idea. All right, what else could we do? What else could we do? How else could we get from the middle school to high school and be able to record whether or not we're more wet or less wet? Any ideas? Yeah.
Like, have two different shirts, one with one shirt on and see if it gets soaked, and with the other one, walk in the rain and see if it gets soaked even more.
It's a great idea. My question though, how are we going to be able to measure if one is more wet versus the other one? Is there anything we could do? I like your idea and I think we could do this. Yeah.
We could take it and wrap it up really hard and then squeeze all the water out.
That's potentially an idea. Okay. Yeah.
We could weigh them.
Yeah. That's a good idea. All right. So what we could do is we could originally weigh the mass of the shirt. Okay. Make sure that we know what it weighs before there's any water on it. Then we can run across. We can measure the mass of it after you've run across. Then have a new shirt. Measure the mass of it. Run across and measure the mass of it when you're, or walk across, whichever one that you have to do. And so then you can measure the mass of it. Would that tell us how much water is on there? Absolutely. Okay. So that's an experiment that you could run. All right. So there's experimentation. Now the whole while you are doing the lab, you are doing something else. Okay. There's something else that we're doing. Okay, what is that step? Yep.
Recording your data.
Yeah. We say collecting data, but it's the same thing. Collect data. Bless you. Yep. And when you collect the data, you are going to be writing down information. And when I use this word information, what I'm really saying is that these things can be numbers, so numerical data, or they can be words. And I want to introduce you to a fancy term that scientists use for these different things. When we're talking about numbers, it's called, bless you, quantitative data, and the words is called qualitative data. Now, I'll be honest with you, the way that I remember these two is the fact that if you look at quantitative data, see how it has the N in there? Okay, that N always tells me that it's numbers. So if you ever see somewhere where it says quantitative, it really means numerical data. All right, so if we were recording the mass of a shirt, all right, so if I was trying to know how much that the shirt weighs, that's something that would be done with numbers. Okay, we'd look at it, we'd put it on the scale, we'd say that it weighs 5 grams. All right, so this is an example of quantitative data. It's numerical data. Can anybody think of an example of how we could record data with using just words? Yeah.
Like when we did the saltwater and river water experiment, we wrote down what we saw, so in words, and then we wrote down what we saw.
Okay. So words could be like just ideas that you saw, like it could be what your observations are. In this example for the shirt, is it possible for us to just look at the shirt and say which one is more wet? Like that one has a lot more water that's on it, and say that it's covered with water on the shoulders, or that one is covered just a little bit on the left shoulder. Would that be a way of describing the data? Absolutely. Okay, so quantitative data, numbers, that's how we collect data, and then qualitative data is through words. All right. So now that we've collected the data, we are up to the final step of the scientific method. Does anybody know what the final step of the scientific method is? Yep.
Come up with an answer?
Yeah. We call it draw conclusions. Okay, so we draw conclusions, which is basically going to answer a couple things. You're going to look at the data, and try and explain what happened. Okay, so by looking at the data, we should be able to determine what happened. So you look, you see that by walking, it has a greater mass than by running. Okay, how did we figure that out? We measured the mass of it, we look at the data. Okay, so it's an answer to our problem or our question. Okay, so it's an answer to our problem or to our question. And it also tells us, what did we learn? And was our hypothesis correct or incorrect? Okay, so drawing conclusions does a lot. It tells us basically what happened in the data. What did we learn? What is the answer to our problem or to our question? Was our hypothesis correct or incorrect? So those are the 5 steps of the scientific method. Now, a lot of times when we go through this stuff, you're going to use this without even thinking of the steps. All right? So I want to take a minute and I want you to think about this last experiment that we just did. Okay, where you had the candle, you had the water, food coloring, beaker. And I want to think about how you used the scientific method. How did you go about using that? And wherever your notes are, take a little time at the very bottom. Just write down step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, 4, 5. And I want you to go through and tell how you used each step of the scientific method. Okay, so step number 1, what was the problem that we were trying to solve? Step number 2, what was your hypothesis? Step number 3, what was your experiment that you ran? Step number 4, what data did you record? Step number 5, what did you discover or learn? Okay, so take about 3 minutes to do that. You don't need to write big fancy sentences here. Just give a little, like, what each one of these was in the lab. All right, so step number 1. What was the problem? What was the problem? Yeah.
What will happen when you put a beaker over the candle?
Okay, so our first problem is, what will happen if we put a beaker over a candle? Okay, so that's what our question or problem was. Step number 2 is what? What is the second step? What is the second step of the scientific method?
Good morning to Weston Middle School students and staff. Please excuse the interruption. First,
So can I tell you the step,
That'd be swell.
the
Yeah.
actual step, or the one that
Both.
I wrote down?
Both.
Alright, so what I wrote so my group thought the taller candle would go out first,
Okay.
and you have to develop a hypothesis.
Okay, so developing a hypothesis, you thought the candle will go out. All right. Third step of the scientific method, Melody.
You experiment.
Okay, and just give me a quick summary of what we did.
What we did was we put a candle in a pie pan that was filled with colored water, and then we put the beaker over it, and the water rose inside the beaker, and the candle slowly went up.
All right, so pie plate. I'm going to summarize this. Pie plate with water, light, candle, cover with beaker. All right, so that was the experiment that we did. All right, while we were doing that experiment, we were doing the 4th step. What was that 4th step? Yep.
Collect data
All right, and what data did we collect as we were doing it? Yep.
that the candle would go out
All right, the
because of the lack of oxygen.
candle went out, and something else happened. Yep, go ahead.
The water started to rise.
All right, water goes. All right, good. And the final step is what? What is that final step? What's that final step? Yep.
Draw a conclusion.
Okay. And what did you discover about this this experiment?
That the candle went out.
Okay, candle went out, and we said the reason is potentially lack of O2, or we said that it is because of CO2. And something else happened. Water went up, and the reason for that was what? What caused that to go up? What caused the water to go up? It was in the video. Yep.
Wasn't it like the carbon dioxide was bouncing off and then as soon as and then it like came back together and then made this vacuum?
Yeah, there was a lot of here. If this is our beaker and here was our opening, there was a lot of heat that was being caused, and there was a lot of pressure. And what was happening is that it created kind of this vacuum that was pulling the water up. And as soon as the candle went out, okay, it started to rise up until it cooled off, and then eventually it stopped. It didn't go very much higher than that. Now, had we heated this up more and we had more space, the candle would have obviously went, or the water would have risen up more. So the water went up because of this vacuum effect that was created. Okay, good. So those are the steps of the scientific method, and you can apply it to basically anything. Each lab that we do, all right, you are always going to be using these steps, most likely without ever even knowing it. Now, the last thing that I need to cover very quickly is sometimes things are too big or they're very difficult for us to be able to actually use the actual item, all right? So, for example, if this is Earth, okay, Mother Earth, and we wanted to know how warm it is with the different layers of the atmosphere, would we be able to just take, on a nice Friday afternoon, take a little trip to the troposphere? No, okay. Finances would be a little challenging. It might be a little bit of, we wouldn't be able to get back in our allotted time. So what do we use instead sometimes if we can't financially do it or if it's too big for us to use? Yep.
You use like models.
Very good. So what we use is models. And a model is a representation of the thing we want to study. Okay, so it's that representation of the thing that we want to study. And specifically, scientific models are going to be an easier way to understand things that might be large or difficult. So it's an easier way to study things that are too large or far away. And this could also be small, because when we study atoms, too far away, easier way to study things that are too large or far away or small, all right? And it's our way of studying them. All right, so we can observe them directly. And that's it for notes. Okay, so I'm going to stop this.